You've heard me talk about this moment in time in history for the better part of 2 or 3 weeks now. Every Sunday I've jumped up in the pulpit and talked about how not only has our congregation over the span and course of our existence given birth to 6,000 churches worldwide as the mother church of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, but also how this congregation aided in the early development, yea, even the founding of the country of Liberia. I will not insult your intelligence. A brief narrative of the account of why we are here tonight is listed in our Vesper order of worship tonight. But I would like to emphasize how there's never been a time in the history of Mother A.M.E. Zion Church when we have not been on the cutting edge of human liberation and dignity. I was hoping at least one person would say amen. Amen. We are the Church of Black Liberation. Amen. That is who we are. That's what we do. That's what we do best. Liberation seemingly comes out of our pores. That's precisely who we are. So on that day in January of 1820, when some 80+ persons arrived in New York from Virginia, from Philadelphia, from Maryland, and the bulk of them being from right here in New York, when they arrived preparing to board a ship known as the Elizabeth to kiss the American dream goodbye. For at that time, and even to this point, it did not include us. These 80+ persons decided that it would be better for them to be free in West Africa than a third-class free citizen in America. They sold what they had. Many of them had to steal their own freedom from those who enslaved them. They were runaways. They heard a boat was going to West Africa, and if they were willing to make it to New York, there would be a seat on the boat for them. And they got here. When they got here, the East and Hudson rivers were frozen. The boat, the Elizabeth, couldn't leave. It was down to 10 degrees outside, and they arrived, many of them scantily clad, with nothing but a desire and a burning fire in their heart for freedom and the clothing on their back. They arrived here in New York, and it was cold. They had nowhere to go, nowhere to sleep. The boat couldn't move. The ship they were getting on couldn't leave, but they heard about another ship. The old ship of Zion. That's a sermon, you know. Oh, the Elizabeth might have been frozen to the dock, but there was some warmth among the people in the Zion Church, then located on the corner of Church and Leonard Streets, downtown. The members of Mother Zion welcomed these brothers and sisters into their homes until the river thawed out. There were 2 schools of thought that were going on in our country at the time regarding should black people go back to Africa. This was 100 years before Marcus Garvey brought it back to national conversation. Literally, exactly 100 years before Garvey. When the American Colonizational Society decided to bring this idea to the forefront beginning in 1813, there were persons in Philadelphia who gathered at Mother Bethel A.M.E. Church under Reverend Richard Allen. 4,000 people swarmed the church and all around. to have this meeting with these white industrialists who believed in liberation for black people but did not believe that it could happen here in America. And quite frankly, their question 200 years ago is a looming question for black people in America even right now. I just left a rally tonight at Lenox Terrace, where the black people who live here in Harlem, number one, we can't afford to live here now. And with 5 more buildings going up around Lenox Terrace that are not at all designed to be affordable, at least for the people who live here. And our fight has to be, we don't need more expensive housing, we need better housing for the people in this community to be able to afford. Somebody say amen. Amen. So those sympathetic white persons 200 years ago asked the question, can black people truly be treated as an equal in the United States of America? That's a healthy question for us to ask tonight. In Philadelphia, meeting in Mother Bethel Church, James Fortin and others and Richard Allen said to that group, oh no, we're not going back to Africa. We have built this nation with our own hands, and we're not going back to Africa. Well, that's an important reason for that, because black people in Philadelphia in the year 1820 were prospering by leaps and bounds. Our black brothers and sisters in Philadelphia were doing very well in Egypt. That's a sermon for another day. Yeah, we might have some semblance of equality as a people, but the question here is, are we just finding new ways to be comfortable in Egypt? We're still enslaved, still in bondage. We're still in Egypt. We're just doing a little bit better. Go where we want to go. Pharaoh is not on us as much as Pharaoh once did, but we're still in Egypt. Let me tell you how I know we're still in Egypt. We got a preacher coming up here in a minute. This is the statement of purpose. Let me tell you how I know we're doing well in Egypt. When a 100-year-old documented Tuskegee Airman can sit in the gallery during the State of the Union address, be recognized by the leader of the free world, and that same documented 100-year-old Tuskegee Airman not be the one to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom, but rather a sick, narcissistic racist by the name of Rush Limbaugh. Don't you know we are still in Egypt? Yes, we are. Rush Limbaugh. The same Rush Limbaugh who said that slavery was a good idea, and if slavery was still around, we'd be doing better economically. Rush Limbaugh. And to watch that 100-year-old documented Tuskegee Airman have to stand up and clap as Rush Limbaugh. Don't you know we're in Egypt? We might be sitting in Harlem, but we're in Egypt as a people. So in Philadelphia, we were doing very well. As well as can be expected considering the times. So the folk in Philadelphia are like, no, we're doing fine. We're not going, number one, we're not going to Africa, and we're not going back to a land we've never known. Many of them were born here. The conversation was different in New York, because there were free black communities here in New York. This church is proof of that. free black New York developed as a byproduct of the growth and the development of Mother A.M.E. Zion Church. Somebody say amen. Amen. And so the conversation was different here because slavery was still legal in New York State and New York City. We were free, but we knew we were still in bondage. Did you know in 1820, no more than 3 persons of African descent could gather without white supervision? You could be free, you could be whatever, enslaved. No more than 3 of us could gather without white supervision without breaking the law. So every time class number 31 of John Street Church that became Mother Zion gathered without white supervision, we were intentionally breaking the law. Every time they gathered in William Miller's cabinet shop down on Orange Street, or every time they gathered in Peter Williams' tobacco shop down on Baxter Street, beginning in 1774, to have conversations on how to eradicate slavery in New York State, they were breaking the law. You think being black in New York is hard now? I'm down on Bloomberg, but we're walking around here as if stop and frisk is a new thing. That idea was not native to Mr. Bloomberg. He inherited that from the racial policies of mayors of New York 200 and 250 years earlier. This is nothing new to us as a people. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the Son. So when it came time for black folk in New York to stay or go, they hit the road, Jack. Some stayed, but some opted to leave. And when it was time for the ship to leave, there were 3 families in this church who were so moved and so inspired by opportunity in a land that they had never known, but a land that was their home. They opted to say, "We're sorry, Reverend Barrett. Sorry, Reverend Rush. Sorry, Reverend Miller. Sorry, Abraham Thompson. Sorry, Reverend Levin Smith. Sorry, Mrs. Aurelia Barrett. But we got to go." And they left. And on February 6th, they joined that cadre of brothers and sisters who moved from here to the area now known as Liberia. And when they did, they labored for 2 years. And in 1827, this group, the Elizabeth, those who were on this boat known as the Elizabeth, which was regarded as the Liberia's Mayflower. Wow. They established the country of Liberia. I think that deserves a hand. So we gather here 200 years later to the day of them kissing this false sense of freedom goodbye here in a society where racism is as American as apple pie. And they gave birth to a new land. Some churches can start the church down the street. Some churches start shelters and centers and things of that sort, which is necessary. Mother Zion has given birth to so much. And we are here tonight to remember those who allowed their discomfort to go back to a land they never knew, to accept a freedom they could never embrace here. Amen.